Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the 10 Laws podcast with East Forest. I am that guy. This week, I have a really cool episode with Paul Selig. If you know Paul Selig, you're probably pretty excited. If you don't know Paul and his work, you're about to be introduced to something pretty interesting. He is one of the foremost spiritual channels that is out there today. I ran across his work. I'd actually heard about it and seen it on the internet and on podcasts and at Esalen in the past, but I hadn't seen him in person or met him until I did an event with Aubrey Marcus for his Fit for Service event in Malibu, and Paul was the other guy doing an offering, and Rod and I got to attend that channeling session. And it was really cool, and then we got to have dinner afterwards, and we didn't get a chance to really vibe out too much at dinner because it was this really raucous Greek restaurant, and I could tell Paul was pretty spent from the event, and it was probably the most epic dinner I've ever had in my life. Just like the generosity of Aubrey's laying out all this food and the music and dancing on tables, and it was amazing. But I didn't really get a chance to connect with Paul on that sort of personal level, and I felt like we had a connective energy in that sense. And so it was wonderful that he was willing to come on the podcast, because for me, it's a great way for me to be able to connect with others and then share it with you guys as well too. So just want to let you know a little bit about Paul before we dive into this. He was born in New York City. He still lives in New York City. He got a master's from Yale, and he was a university professor for a long time. He was at NYU, I'm pretty sure, and he has an MFA in creative writing program from Goddard College, and so he's had a normal life, is what I'm trying to say, but he has this other ability that sort of came through for him to channel these guides, and when he does channel, which he will actually do at times in this podcast, he speaks everything sort of twice. So he's sort of getting the channeled message that comes through very fast, and he speaks it low, and then he repeats it for you so you can kind of hear it. So you're kind of hearing things quickly and twice. It does take a little bit of tuning in your brain to tap into that, but I'm just giving you a heads up because that's kind of that's how he does it. And so for those of you who are familiar with that, you'll be like, yeah, this is Paul doing his thing. And for those of you who are not, I didn't want you to be distracted by, wait a minute, what's happening? That being said, channeling is something that's easy to be skeptical of. And I know there's people out there who think like, well, look, the person's just making it up. Look, we could go through reasons why this might be difficult for Paul to make it up. One of those main points that he brings up is that the books he's written, he's channeled them, some of them live in a public space. He's just gone straight out and just said the whole book, word for word, with no edits. They just dictate what he says, and that's the book. That is indeed something that would be incredibly difficult to do. And even if he was pulling that off just as some sort of superhuman ability, still impressive. But nonetheless, most importantly is when I listen to Paul and what he's channeling and the information that's coming through, it feels like there's nothing really I can argue with there. It's very universal. It's full of truth and love and things that they make sense for me. I don't know what to say. And there are times in this podcast where he got to say things that were very relevant and personal to myself and my own path. And you know what? They're the same things that I've been thinking. They're sort of just reverberating the truths that I know in my heart already. And so I wanted to bring him on to help amplify his message. Not that he needs any amplifying, but just to continue the conversation that we're all always having in this walk of life. And I love what he's doing, and I think you'll love it too. And he's got lots of wonderful books, and he's out there sometimes doing live events. So maybe you'll get a chance to see him in person someday too. So you're going to enjoy this conversation with Paul. But as this comes out, I'm touring in Australia, or just about to. But we'll be in Australia in February of 2020, and we've got dates happening starting around the weekend of the 14th of February, and then we leave at the end of the month. So we have events all the way until February 23rd, I believe. So eastforest.org/tour for all of our Australian friends. grab a ticket. Please say hi. Thanks for telling your friends. And thank you for giving this podcast a review. If you're on Apple Podcasts, give it 5 stars. It makes a big difference. Sharing it on social media, posting, and you can always say hello at East Forest or at East Forest Music or info@eastforest.org. Okay, let's get into this awesome conversation with the wonderful Paul Selig. Thank you, Paul, for joining us. I was mentioning that I felt that we all have this ability to receive and channel. I mean, I often think about where does creativity come from, or how it's encoded in all the myths of the past about the muse. And for myself as a musician, I often wonder, like, I feel I'm more in service to stepping up to the plate and allowing something to come through. Like, I'm responsible for my discipline in a way to actually, put my hands to the keys or just start creating. But what comes through is sort of the fruits of that labor. I don't know. And I wanted to ask you if you felt that what's coming through you is something universal that's, in a sense, available to all of us. It's just about how we get used to hearing it, our ability to listen and what discipline we can bring to that, to be open to those energies.
Oh, I don't know. It's an interesting thing. I tend to make a distinction between inspiration and channeling. And inspiration is high-level stuff. But the difference with inspiration and channeling is when one is inspired, one is also, still crafting the work. So the musician knows what a chord is and knows a progression, perhaps, and, understands the instrument he plays. The distinction that I tend to make around channeling is that, it's stenography, truthfully. I don't get to go back and fix it or craft it or change it to suit my needs or the market's needs or any of those things. It doesn't happen that way for me. So when I'm reading, which is a psychic skill, I think I am tuning in more to that level that you're speaking to, where I can access information for other people from, a collective field. And when I'm channeling, I'm really in a different level of service. So I really do believe that we're all radios and we all have the capacity to tune into the higher strata, the higher levels that are there. But I don't know, truthfully, and I really don't know, that everybody's sort of built for channeling. I think that there's a sort of a level of wiring that happens at a certain point. I really feel that in some ways I was sort of restructured somehow to be able to do some of what I do.
Right.
But I do believe in the importance of inspiration. When I was a college teacher, and I was that for 25 years, there was a point that came about, 10 years before I stopped, where I couldn't work with notes anymore. I just couldn't use a lecture note. And it just became about opening myself up. And that was inspired work. I was given things to share with people. I knew things that I couldn't know otherwise. But the distinction that I make from channeling is really, when I'm channeling, it's like somebody is imprinting the vibration of the phrase or the word into me that then gets translated into a language that's shareable. And I think that the information, in whatever form it takes, is probably available to everybody at a higher level. Because I don't think I'm special to the information. I just sort of happen to be a handy or effective conduit for what seems to want to come through. So yeah, we all have capacity. But the illustration I always use is, I'm not a 6'4" athlete. I'm not going to play basketball. Somebody's built and trained for that skill set, And I think we all have different capacity and different ability, but I do think we all have the ability to move to our own knowing, which is our inspiration.
Right. Do you feel that when you're channeling, it's going through the filter of your consciousness, in the way when we do hypnosis, essentially, it has to go through that literally the funnel of our brain and to come out as words, in a sense. And Well, first off, do you have that sense like there's a sort of a translation coming through your own human form?
Yes and no. I mean, I think they're using my vocabulary, but what happens on occasion is they use words I don't know. In the newest book that's coming out, Alchemy, I was channeling at Esalen, and they kept saying a word, and I wouldn't repeat it because I didn't think it was a real word, or I certainly didn't know what it meant.
What was the word? Do you remember?
Penumbra, which is a word, and it was a perfect word for their lecture. And it's in the book. Paul is hearing a word. He's not saying it. We'll continue. And I footnoted it because after the lecture, I said the word's penumbra, and everybody got on their phone. It's like the light that exists beyond the shadow. So, they have more capacity than I do. They know certainly more than I know. But they are working through me. And it's an odd relationship. So, I understand, for example, that Edward Casey, who was channeling in the early part of, the last century, was a Sunday school teacher. And his channeling was full of, these and thous, which was how he knew to speak. I don't know why, it comes through me the way that it does. But all I can really do is be present for how it comes through and do my very best to stay out of the way. I mean, you've seen me channel, so it's not terribly elegant to watch. It's clumsy. It's a mile a minute. Sometimes it comes so fast that I can barely speak the words as they come. And I feel, truthfully, that if this were to be coming through Paul the persona, I'd look great doing it. And it would come through elegantly and beautifully, and I'd look terrific doing it. But this is just what happens when I see people, and occasionally I do, because I don't follow other channels, and I have no opinion, truthfully. People do different kinds of things, but once in a while, I'll see scrolling through social media somebody who looks, terribly elegant doing what they're doing, and I go, boy, how does that happen? Because for me, it's a very physical experience. I mean, I'm running all this energy. My body's being used in a way that isn't entirely comfortable or convenient to me. And, what I've been told is my eyes often turn bright blue when I have dark eyes. I have hazel eyes. So it's a very strange thing. So that's how I understand it. The filter is Paul, and the guides address me and my stuff in this work. I think that there's no way that they can get around it because I interrupt the transmission so often with my questions. If they say something that's too far out there for me to wrap my brain around, or I contest, or makes me uncomfortable, I have been known to interrupt the transmission, and the guides will say, Paul is asking. In the books now, they actually seem to anticipate my interruptions. The books are the unedited transcripts of the channelings. I don't get to go back and change anything. I think 3 words were altered in the last book. One of them I mispronounced, maybe one word that I mispronounced. The copy editor tried to change 2 words, and I put them back to what the guides had said. And that's what I do. If it comes out of my mouth this way, this is what it is. It's not about prettying it up, which doesn't necessarily make for an easy read, but people need to remember that it's an oral teaching that's been transcribed and is now printed as a written text. So anyway, I don't know what I was saying. I know what I wanted to say, though. I do interrupt and I do question because, I don't write these books. My name's on the cover. So I feel a level of accountability to my integrity here, which means if I question something, I'm going to ask about it because that feels like the truthful thing to do. And I found that much of what I question, other people question too, and it's often a helpful interruption.
Do you feel that yourself, I've heard you talk about, let's talk about the sense of worthiness. Mm-hmm. And people often feel that, I don't know, they're not up to snuff to be able to receive certain things or embody a certain energy for a friend or something I've got my own problems in a way. I'm not this perfect being. And you've spoken about this. You are transmitting these universal truths and messages of love and messages that maybe you wouldn't identify with. You would say like, well, look, I have my own things I'm dealing with too.
Yeah.
Is that an edge for you, or has it been? Where have there been times where you just felt like, why you, or like, how can you hold, in a sense, some of the intensity of some of these truths?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from the very beginning, and I started doing a little group that met in my apartment and met for 18 years when I was about 30 years old. So I'm 58 now. So it's a long time ago that I began doing this. I began doing this work because of the energy that was coming through when I was doing the work that was palpable to the whole room. And it was a way of sharing in this experience of frequency or energy or God or whatever you wanted to call it that was palpable, which made it very real. And it was important to me to do it with others because it verified the experience. The information that began coming through me early on was secondary. I was somewhat dismissive of it because who the hell was I, to be doing this? Now, what I understand over time, when I was 48, I think, it was 1998. So I quit smoking. I'd been a heavy smoker, much of my life. And my abilities had been there and quite well developed in my mid-30s. And then they sort of went on the same level of agreement. They didn't sort of excel. I mean, I was channeling, I was doing the work I'd been doing. When I quit smoking, everything went through the roof,
Wow.
Their sentience, my ability to feel, and that's when the guides started to lecture through me. And they said, we want to continue working through you, but you have to address this issue. And I actually quit the next day, which was amazing. And I was a 4-pack a day guy. But everything shifted. Yeah, everything shifted when I quit. And that's when the work that I do now came through. So, I've had to come to terms with some of this. I mean, it's like, I don't care how eloquent I am. I don't think I'm capable of shutting my eyes and dictating verbally. It's now 8 books that require no editing at all. And the last 3 or 3.5 were done completely in front of audiences. They were dictated live. And I trust that there is something at work here. And when I go back to the work, and I've been having to do that personally recently, to go back to the last book that they dictated, because it's explaining a fair amount of what I'm going through, which is highly uncomfortable. I mean, it's a little like being turned inside out. And that's what they say happens in this work at a certain point. Our frames of reference for who we feel we're supposed to be start to release. These mirrors that we put up to sort of predetermine how we should be seen in the world sort of fall away. And that's an uncomfortable process in many ways, I think, for me and for others as well. So the worthiness issue, the guides actually took on in one of the books. It's called The Book of Knowing and Worth, which was the 3rd book they dictated. And it really does address our innate sense that we're not worthy of a relationship with Source. And the books that follow are really very much about that relationship and a level of embodiment in accord with that Source that they seem to be bringing us forward to. But it's a challenge, and it's a challenge culturally. We live in a world, I've been told by the guides, that, that if there is a God, it's something that's up there in a cloud and we're stuck here in the mud. And these guides say, God is the mud, and it's also your spinal cord, and it's also the sky, and it's what's birth and death, all things, not just the pretty things that you want to put a bow on and call spiritual. They say God is all things or nothing at all. And they talk about God as the infrastructure that, underscores all reality. It's the source of all things, not just the things we wish to be.
Right. And that resonates with me. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, have they spoken at all to you in all these books and all this time, sort of about the bigger questions of why? Like, if God is all things, it just sort of is the existence of the matter and non-matter, just everything.
Yeah.
Why are we going through the experience of experiencing ourselves and so forth?
I mean, it's big stuff, and I suspect they do talk about it probably excuse me, in all of the books, they talk about this is school. We've chosen this. We've chosen to come here and learn and to realize ourselves, which is to know who and what we truly are, which is of source through these experiences that we claim, and through this collective field that we operate in. I mean, the collective field that we operate in, I understand from them, they call it an octave. And they say we're existing in a shared octave with high and low tones. This last week in a workshop, they called it a tapestry, that's being informed by the consciousness of everybody. We're all contributing to this idea of reality that we share. But the reality that we share, I understand, has been somewhat fraught with fear, and that we've given fear tremendous authority, even beyond what we know, to dictate what we're allowed and who we are and who others are. And they say that the action of fear is to claim more fear, and every choice we make in fear gets us more of the same. And every time we deny the divine in anyone or anything, we are putting ourselves in that darkness. What you damn, they say, damns you back. What you put in darkness, who you put in darkness calls you to that darkness. So their work with us seems to be about lifting us to a higher octave, which they say exists concurrently with the one that we're in. They say any song can be sung in, higher octaves up into infinity, beyond what the ears can hear. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And they're working with us to sort of transpose the who and the what that we are in order to support this reality, this shared reality, in being transposed or translated to an awareness of what they call the inherent divinity that's in all things. So the why, I'm going to ask them, and I'm just going to say this because I'm going to ask them, and I don't know, how my reception is today. I haven't tuned in yet, but when I channel, I whisper the words and repeat them. I always have to say that because people go, what the hell is this guy doing? But let me ask the why, if that's okay. We would like to answer this. Saying we would like to answer this, the why is because it is. The why is because it is. It has been chosen by you. You are claiming reality. You are claiming your reality and your relationship to it. That is the wisdom. That is the presupposition that humanity has indeed choice, has indeed choice. Now the choice to learn, and evolve the soul, and evolve as a soul is an agreement you all make, is an agreement you all make. But how that evolution occurs can be translated to the upper room, or the higher octave, or the higher octave, where learning happens somewhat differently, your investment in who you think you are through the identity you have been given, agreed to, or chosen supports the lower vibrational field, as you begin to release the mask you've worn, as you begin to release the masks that you've worn. You can lift and bring others with you, and bring others with you to a true awareness of the divine that's inherent in you, of the divine that is inherent in you and all humanity, and in all humanity, period. And they're saying period. So I guess because it is was the answer, which
is the perfect Zen answer. It's like, it is because it is.
Yeah.
I love that. And obviously, when you talk about octaves of consciousness, that means that resonates with me deeply, because I often look at all of this through the metaphor of music, and I feel like music, sound, is one of the substrates of existence that really does literally explain a lot of what we're going through. When you think about overtones, like every tone creates these essentially other tones that are harmonics of that tone, and they just exist, and they go on for infinity, right? We just can't hear them, and they're all in these sort of relationships of fifths and octaves and so forth. And you look at a piano, and it has these octaves to it, but our consciousness, you could say, is within 4 of those octaves maybe, and then what's beyond that, it exists, but we're not. There's a boundary condition, and maybe that boundary condition is like duality in a way. And or trying to explain to my dog, like my own consciousness to his, but that dog has its octave of consciousness in a way, and maybe it crosses over with parts of mine. But I love this idea of like a spectrum of energy, of consciousness that, of course, is probably infinite in a sense. And do the guides ever talk about not just where they're coming from, like in a sense, we're the dog in a way, and they're sort of explaining through our own octave, another octave, through metaphor and words. But were they human at one time, or were they in another octave? So they sort of, is that sort of our destiny?
Well, one of the ways they've described themselves, and there's a number of them, and my favorite actually is when they say, we are who you become when you know who you are, which I like. And they say that some of them have been in form and some of them have not. Or they say some of us have known ourselves in form, some of us have not. And what else do they say? They say that they meet us in this intermediary plane that they call the upper room, which is the octave above us. And they lift us there to be taught, but they say that they exist beyond that. They say the upper room, or the octave above this one, is where it's the highest that we can express at while we're maintaining physical form. And that there are other strata that exist beyond that, other octaves, where form is not in the least bit a requirement. So they can choose to know themselves through form, I expect, at a level, and they can sort of work through mine at a level, and I'm sure others as well, but that they do exist beyond it. So that's kind of what I know. It's an interesting relationship, I have to say the least, with this stuff. When I'm channeling, when I'm in Congress with them, when I'm in transmission, it's extraordinarily real. It's all that's happening. And when I'm not, it's kind of like, it's not that the radio's turned off. I'm just not tuned into their channel, unless I ask a question, in which case, more than likely, I'll get some support.
Yes. And I really appreciate you dropping into that space a moment ago on this podcast. I'm sure listeners would love to hear more of that if they're open to speaking and you're willing to be in that space, as long as it's not too much for you. Because I think some of these questions are, it's sort of like we get the both worlds. We get your opinion and we get to hear from them as well.
It's the same, and they've been known to correct me a lot. I once did a book signing after like the first or the second book in Asheville. And I was just talking and somebody raised their hands and said, very eagerly, will the guide say something? And they showed up and they said, yes, we are not the entertainment. And that was all you heard. So they tend to come through to teach, and I found that if there's a question that's asked that's something that I can't take, or that I answer and I get wrong about their teachings, my interpretation of what they do, they will often, come through and say what they wish.
Well, I have a question, and that is, and this is something people ask me a lot, and it's something I also think about a lot. Mm-hmm. It's like, what litmus test do we use, or how do we know when we're on our path? People often trying to find their purpose and path, but when you're kind of doing it, it's like, I feel like it's a daily practice, a slippery slope, especially these days when folks like you and me too, where our work itself has to do with spirituality, but then it's like it becomes something that there's money involved, and there's social media and these things, and it's a razor thin line where I'm constantly sort of evaluating, am I working at my highest truth right now? Or, what's being called to me in this moment, and where is the sort of trap where I could be going off base here?
Yeah,
and lose my own connection to why I'm doing this and what I'm doing. It's it's sort of the keel that keeps that ship pointing straight. And I'm often trying to really be honest with myself. Like, am I being truthful? Like, is this my work, or am I just? I don't want to be phony holy and say well, it is my work because I say so.
Well, you can do your work and not be phony holy. And I have learned that I have to show up as myself with all of my confusion, and my doubt and my, I don't look right. I don't sound right. I'm an overweight guy in his 50s. I'm not wearing white. I don't do what I should, quote unquote, do. When I was younger, I thought I was supposed to. And I learned quickly that didn't work. When I was in my 30s, early 30s, a couple of different mediums said to me, you will not be doing your work fully until you're close to 50. And I was like, what's this about? I mean, I was teaching college. I wasn't looking to get a career as a channel. And somebody said, you've been veiled for your own protection. And in retrospect, I don't think I could have handled the expectations. I still struggle with them. I'm Paul, I'm learning just like everybody else. Now, your question of how do we know is an interesting one, and they're actually pointing at you, so I'll need to do this for you specifically, if that's okay, as opposed to, everybody, because it may be different. So let me just tune into you, and I'm going to use what I assume is your birth name. Is that correct? What I see up here? Yes?
My birth name is, Trevor Oswald.
Let me use that first, and I may ask for the name you work under. You come through a little panicky saying, I have to understand everything to do it right. I have to do it right. I have to be motivated to do it right. And you're looking for the next right thing. So you're quite conscientious, if this is accurate, it is, and they're saying it is. Give me the name that you work under, please. Just speak it for me.
East Forest.
You see, when I go to East Forest, you get a little more noble, and you will say, I will learn the way I must. And that is true, but so is the other. So you're actually kind of operating both in this uncertainty, which is your, the personality self, and also the part of you that self-identifies in a higher way, has its own awareness. Let me see what you do need, actually, in order to stay on your path. There's no wrong path. Well, the guides are saying there is no wrong path, and that was our first answer to your question, and that was our first answer to your question. You will learn through all things. Indeed, you will learn through all things. Everything you encounter, indeed, is not to learn. Indeed, is an opportunity to learn. Choices made in fear. Choices made in fear to protect the identity of the small self, to protect the identity of the small self, which are choices made in fear, which are choices made in fear, will get you more of the same, will get you more of the same when you may show up. When you may show up naked or vulnerable, or seen as you are, or seen as you are without care of how that is perceived, of how that is perceived, you have arrived in a higher way. The true self as you. The true self as you does not care how he is seen, does not care how he is seen, how he is exposed, what he looks like to others, what he looks like to others. Those are the masks the small self wears. Those are the masks the small self wears. In commerce, an idea, an agreement to be an idea of one thing to be, of what one thinks he should be. Now, in your case, the higher aspiration, which is deeply truthful, I'm willing to be seen as I truly am. I am willing to be seen as I truly am. Will take you through the journey. Will take you through the journey of adornment, to release the adornment, and sometimes an individual finds himself emblazoned with the ideas of others, who one should be in order to realize he or she are none of those things, and that is somewhat of the path you're taking, and that is somewhat of the path you are taking. I am willing to be seen a certain way, to understand that is not who I am. It's a valid way to learn. It's a valid way to learn, and you are doing well with it, period. So that's interesting. So that's what they're saying. I don't know if that makes any sense to you at all. Yeah.
Yeah, I deeply resonate with the idea, and this is something that is the edge of I think about a lot, is how vulnerable and truthful can I be about, just like you were saying with yourself, like who you are and how you're showing up. And then at the same time, whether through the work you do or the words you say, you're in a form of inspiration that is perhaps inspiring myself too. Like it's speaking about the highest forms that maybe I don't fully embody. Yet there's that authenticity of sort of saying like, but I'm me where I'm at. I'm doing my best. And that's sort of where I try to do, as I say, I'm not wearing those. How many masks can I drop in this moment? And I still have work to do on that level, but I do feel I've done a lot of work to think about that and be like, how authentic can I be in this moment?
Well, I think finally it happens anyway when you're on this path. You know, I was doing a workshop in San Diego just, 2 days ago. And the guides used this image of a lantern show, these old things that used to have like this sort of, I don't know, I haven't seen one since I was a small kid. I don't know if they're still even around. These sort of, round things with cutouts, and you'd have a little light bulb in the middle or a candle in the old days, and you'd spin it and it would project shadows on the walls, like a movie. And they said, that's really what your fears are. These cutouts that obscure the light, that project these things around you. And, the process that they seem to be encouraging us through, which I'm not loving in the least some days, I have to say, is seeing what those things are to be able to release them. And this really is in order for the light to shine with less obstruction. I don't know if no obstruction is possible while we're in human form, because they're saying indeed it is there, but you have to be willing to go there. You don't see what it is, and you don't see what it is until you see the projection of it, until you see the projection of it. Then you're right with yourself. Then you are invited to look in yourself and seeing why you claim it, and seeing why you claim it, why it's a mandate for your learning, why it's a mandate for your learning, or why you choose to agree to something, or why you choose to agree to something that only gives you pain, that only gives you pain, period. And they're saying period. So I guess, what this means is we get to encounter our stuff. That's part of being alive. I mean, this thing, that we're going to learn through everything we go through, I find helpful and not always comforting. I want to learn in the comfort of my choices, and I wish, truthfully, that my path had been, I'll give you this. This is an anecdote from when I was just starting out. I was in my 20s, and somebody else started a little healing group. And they did some meditation where everybody had to go, you had to meditate and see your path unfold before you. And what did your path look like? And everybody was going around saying, oh, the flowers are blooming as I walk past them, and the butterflies are. And what I saw was like climbing up the mountain to the witch's castle in the Wizard of Oz, like with a pickaxe and bloody feet. And I was in such a rush to get up there, but I also believe that I thought it had to be hard. I was coming from, a tough place. I'd stopped drinking. I didn't have any money. Things were not easy. It was hard to go to a meditation group, with a bunch of people when you had holes in your socks. I remember those days,
right.
And it was a challenging time for me. But I don't feel that I have that investment in the difficulty anymore. But I don't know that this kind of growth is necessarily convenient to the personality who wants it to look a certain way. I mean, I read for people sometimes and they say, well, I have a great spiritual life, but what about my business life? How do I, they're the same thing.
Same thing. Yeah. Yeah. You talked about, in a sense, it sounded like fear was a litmus test in a way. And when you said that, I was thinking, well, then is risk the anecdote? Or the antidote? It's
interesting. I hear yes. But anyway, showing up anyway is part of it. But I get that knowing that there's nothing to fear is the big lesson. I'm not there yet, but it's the big lesson. They're saying it is the big lesson that fear is the liar, that fear is the liar, fear is the provocateur. When you move beyond it, it loses its power.
Well, then clearly, for the sake of us being incarnate, fear is the golden juice, because that's the thing we use as the grist for the mill to overcome. Otherwise, there's no point in being here. What do they say and what we do with the fear that inevitably comes up?
A big head shake no about the grist for the mill. I think fear, this is what they've said about it before, and maybe I'll say it wrong and they'll correct. But what they've said is, fear is a teacher. You can learn not to pick up the hot frying pan without, a glove or a pot holder. You can learn by burning your hand, but you don't have to. there are other ways you can learn.
Mm-hmm.
And so fear is a teacher, but it's not a high teacher. Fear teaches us that we shouldn't trust people, that we should build walls to separate people from us, that we should, be frightened of those people over there who do these things, pray that way, believe in these things. I mean, fear is all about separation, as I understand it, And the guides have said, we've claimed so much separation from the one beside us that we've claimed the separation from our source as well, which is why they really do teach forgiveness, and not forgiveness like it's okay what they did, forgiveness as I'm willing to unbind myself to what's claiming me in vibrational accord to my anger, to my judgment, to all those things. I mean, one of the exercises in one of the books is to go into a cave. And in that cave, they say, is the last person you ever want to see again as long as you live. And your job is to walk that person out to the light. And the guides say it's because you put them in darkness. They called you to that darkness. And it makes perfect sense to me. Doesn't mean you have to hang out with them and have dinner once you're in the light, but they are free and you're free of them, which is actually the big news. So let me ask if fear is the grist for the mill. Fear is a poor fuel. Fear is a poor fuel. It will ruin the car. It will ruin the car. It will rot the motor. It will rot the motor and leave you stranded in a dark place and leave you stranded in a dark place. Fear is indeed of God. Fear is indeed of God, but denies it, does not know itself as of God, but does not know itself as of God, and claims what it can encounter, and claims what it can encounter in that agreement of separation, to learn through fear, or through an encounter with fear, or through an encounter with fear can be productive. I'm scared to swim. I am scared to swim. I learned to swim anyway. I learned to swim anyway. I enjoy swimming. I enjoy swimming is indeed productive to the growth of the individual, is indeed productive to the growth of the individual. But you're countering the fear, but you are countering the fear by not agreeing to it, by not agreeing to it. You're not empowering fear. You are not empowering fear. You are going beyond it. You are going beyond it. And that is a high choice to make on any occasion. And that is a high choice to make in any occasion, period. And they're saying period.
Our choice seems to be then critical. And I would like to know if the guides have anything to say about this idea that we have destiny, but then at the same time, our choices are critical.
Yeah. I know. Let me see what they want to say in this whole
It's sort of a paradox. But
well, it isn't, I suppose. This is the last thing I thought I would be doing with my life. I quite liked my academic career and my job as a college teacher and grad school, administrator. I was good at it. It was easy. I didn't have to deal with a lot of people's crap. I just showed up and did my thing. And this is a very different life. Now, I just forgot your question.
About destiny and choice, the idea of them coexisting and the importance of the fact that we have this ability to choose.
They do say we have the ability to choose, mm-hmm. And everything is choice, is what they say. So let me see what they want to say about this. We would like to address this in two ways. What he's really asking is free will. What he's really asking is there free will? And indeed there is. And indeed there is. The soul makes choices. The soul makes choices prior to incarnation as to how it may fulfill itself, what it may learn through, what are the lessons that are required for the growth of the soul, what are the lessons that are required for the growth of the soul. But the individual might choose to avoid them, but the individual may choose to avoid them, to forestall them, to learn in other ways, to learn in other ways. That does not make the soul wrong. That does not make the soul wrong, the individual wrong either. It means opportunities are presented. It means opportunities are presented and always met in a high way, and not always met in a high way. The idea of free will simply is about alignment, and indoctrination in some ways and indoctrination in some ways. You've been taught what to choose. You have been taught what to choose through an indoctrinated system, through an indoctrinated system that you know of as history, that you know of as history. This is what a good man does. This is what a good man does. This is what a beautiful woman looks like. This is who you should aspire to be. This is who you should aspire to be. Again, indoctrination. Again, and indoctrination through collective knowing and past agreement, and past agreement that you claim in the present moment, that you claim in the present moment. When you move beyond the collective, when you move beyond the collective, and the offering we offer you here, and the offering we offer you here is the claim, I am free, I'm free, is the claim, I am free, I am free, I am free. When you lift beyond the agreement of the old, when you lift beyond the agreement of the old, how you choose is very different. How you choose is very different, because you're not seeking to support the approval, because you're not seeking to support the approval of the old, or the collective, or the collective, or the idea of self, or the idea of self that seeks to benefit from the authority of others, from the authority of others. He asked for an example. Well, if I'm a good man, if I am in a good man, I will be in a helping profession. I will be in a helping profession. I will do good work. I will do good work. This is an idea of self. This is an idea of self. You may choose a healing profession. You may choose a healing profession, a helping profession, a helping profession. Do what you wish. You may do what you wish, but your truest gift may be other than what you think, may be other than what you think, and how you will best serve the populace, and how you will best serve the populace. The populace may be through something entirely other. The mandate of history. The mandate of history is what you thought was, and seek to bring into the present, claim a future through, and claim a future through. That is only one way to learn. There are higher ways to choose. Say this yes. So they're saying, say this yes. So the simple choice seems to be am I choosing in fear? And if I'm choosing, the guides say it this way, they say there's nothing wrong with the house on the hill. Somebody gets to live there. But why do you want it? And if you want it so that you can be the envy of your neighbors, or to make your brother jealous of you, or to prove to your parents that you're not a failure, you're creating in fear. There's nothing wrong with having a place to live in that supports your needs. But why do we choose what we choose? And that's, I think, one of the simple questions we can ask ourselves at any given time. Do we have destiny? Yes, at the soul level. I hear yes at the soul level, but it's met different ways, but it's met in different ways. That's what I get.
Destiny is meant in different ways?
Met.
Oh, met.
In different ways.
Oh, wow, that's something to chew on.
I guess I haven't heard it before. We've said it before, but you haven't heard it. They're saying to me, well, we've said it before, but you haven't heard it. Imagine that you come into a life seeking to release the self of fear, seeking to release the self of fear of others. You claim all the fear you can. You claim all the fear you can to move beyond the fear of others, to move beyond the fear of others. The opportunities present themselves. We decide to stay fearful, but you decide to stay fearful. You'll get the lesson again. You will get the lesson again. The one who says, I'm no longer afraid. The one who says, I am no longer afraid, lives beyond the fear that she's held, lifts beyond the fear that she's held, supports everybody else in doing the same, supports everybody else in doing the same, and no longer exists in her energetic field. It no longer exists in her energetic field. She can support others in liberation as well. She can support others in liberation as well through nature of her being, her expression, her vibratory field, which is fearless, period. They're saying period.
It's beautiful. Yeah, it's in some ways, when things are said twice like that, it's your brain's trying to play catch up. Yeah. And I could imagine when it's read on the page, it's a different, I know it's a different experience because it's a different form of processing, but I can't imagine what that feels like coming through you at that kind of speed. Is it heard for you as like auditory in your head, or is it more just sort of this force of just, this is the information, it's just coming out?
It's just coming out. I mean, it's not like a voice. It's not like somebody's yelling in my ear.
Thank God.
What it's like is, that's a form of clairaudience. I don't have that when I hear ghosts. People get that with ghosty stuff. What it is for me is, it's like a thought that pronounces itself at the cost of all other thoughts. It's like it just pushes to the frontal lobe and goes bang. And it's not what I'm thinking or what I would choose or what I would prefer. It's usually not what I would prefer. But it comes with a consistency. And again, at the cost, it's, like you have, this is how I used to describe it. Like you have that just buzz of thoughts that's always going on in the background, that kind of white noise and stuff. Mm-hmm. It's like something that interrupts all of that. When I was first opening up as a clairaudient, I was volunteering, doing energy healing at a center for people mostly who were dying of AIDS. It was the height of the AIDS epidemic in New York City, and there were these pop-ups, these sort of alternative centers that were, opening. This was one that Marianne Williamson had started called the Manhattan Center for Living. And I found that when I had my hands on people's bodies, I started to hear things. So I just got my hand on your chest, and all of a sudden I hear Friedrich. And I don't know if Friedrich, and it's not a normal name to hear, but I learned to say, who's Friedrich? And you might say, my father, my lover, my son, my dog, the teacher who told me I was an idiot, would never amount to anything, and then all of this energy would move. And as it would get confirmed, I began to trust the reception, which is how I began to tune in more to the station. And that was the original station. When I read psychically, like when I tuned into you before, I was actually hearing aspects of you. When I'm channeling guides, yeah, I'm tuning in. You're the station I'm playing. And then I tuned to the guides and they came in and talked to you. So yeah, it's a coordinate. Some psychics might work with a pocket watch or a photograph. It's psychometry. I work with a name. So when my radio's tuned into you, or say if you were having issues with your partner, I can tune into your partner and sort of hear back and forth what people are really needing. I consider that more psychic work. When I go to the guides, I'm tuned into them, and they're the broadcasts that are coming through. And truthfully, they're teachers. They don't care. I haven't noticed that they care if I ever get a date, or if I ever, I don't know where I'm supposed to move to. You would think with this ability I would know, but it's like, I want to get out of New York. I don't know where to go. And I'm assuming when I know, I will know. And that's what the guides say, when you know something, truly know it. There's never a question attached. So.
Do you have to do anything to protect yourself from other energies that maybe you don't want coming through, or sort of a...
Well, it's a good question. I work with a prayer of protection when I channel, and I don't do this because I'm frightened of what's out there. I just think of it kind of like safe sex or having an umbrella in the rain. There's a lot of stations you can play. And I do say this when people are starting to open up psychically or to channel, because just because somebody doesn't have a body doesn't mean there's somebody you need to be listening to. My grandma was married 4 times. And none of them worked out well. And she's on the other side. She's probably not who I should be going to for relationship advice, although she might want to offer it. So the challenge that I get, truthfully, is when people are speaking ill of me or they're very angry with me, I can feel it, and I don't know who it is. It's tough. You ever hear that old phrase, your ears must have been ringing? Well, that's like what it is. I feel it in the ears. It's very uncomfortable. And the guides have said to me, well, as long as you care what people think, this is going to be an issue. So it becomes, again, my opportunity to learn. But I actually think I would benefit from working with another level of protection around this stuff, just because, it's not comfortable. And it's unnerving, truthfully. But I've lived with it for many, many years. It seems to come with the porousness of being empathic. And that's really what I am. I don't have, anything that anybody has done to diminish their sensitivity, whether it be alcohol or drugs or food, I've managed. The only one I seem to have left is I still like pizza, but it's all been about trying to subdue the sensitivity. It's why I said when I smoked 4 packs a day, I had a wonderful cloud around me, that was fairly impenetrable. And when that was gone, boy, did I feel everything. And, I was also in detox, I'm sure, every night when I went to sleep, getting the poisons out of my body. So I never really knew what I felt. And some of what I do well is tune into other people and feel them. I actually become them. I've been filmed doing it. It's really kind of trippy. But, if you were to ask for a reading on your grandma, and your grandma was living, and you could intercut me on video with your grandma, and I'd probably start to resemble her, or take on her gestures or facial expressions. It's just this thing that I seem to do. And it's because, we're not just our bodies, and our consciousness is not bound by physical law in the way that we think. I used to think that I was traveling, to people. And the very first time I channeled publicly, which was at a symposium at the Esalen Institute, was a conference for scientists. And I was, one of the people sort of showing up for the scientists and scholars to watch, I guess. The physicist, Dean Radin, was there. And he said, when you're traveling to somebody in China, you're not really going to China, you're going inward. You're working, basically, I guess he described it as inner space. And that was new to me at the time, but that is, I suspect, what it happens. Time, as we understand it, doesn't exist at that level, which is, why if I tune into your grandma and she's crossed, I'll probably feel her as she was when she was alive, and tune into that dynamic with you.
Yeah. Well, I want to honor your time, Paul. I just have two short questions. And that makes a lot of sense to me, in a sense, like when you said time, that would feel like, oh, that might be outside this particular octave in a way. So but that's just something I was thinking. But so when you're channeling or tapping in, you're saying, like when you did the reading about me or about a person, do you feel that you're in communication with that soul or that higher self and another octave up of like me?
There are different levels you can tune into. So I can tune into you at a level of personality and feel you in your anger or frustration or confusion. And that can be really valid. And I can find out why that is, or I can go to the higher self who might explain it. This is what I'm learning from this, and this is what this is doing for me, and this is what I can't let go of. Or this just happened in this last workshop I did. There was some woman whose throat was all blocked, and the guides worked on her, and they said it's from age 14. It's just from trauma from age 14. That it felt like somebody had actually pressed down on her windpipe, and she seemed to know what this was about when they said it, and the energy moved. So you can get information at different levels when you tune in.
Well, I'd be remiss. I have this opportunity. I really would like to know and ask, like, if there's anything from my own highest self, the upper room of myself, that I need to be knowing, for the sake of dropping my own masks.
Well, I'm going to, they're going first, which is surprising. Normally I go in psychically first. People say first. They're saying we will say it first. He is understanding himself. He is understanding himself through what his thinking is. So through what his thinking is still, that's a step. That's a step he needs to transition from. But he needs to transition to knowing he's in the process of this. And he's in the process of doing this. When you know you're not thinking. When you know you're not thinking, you're simply being. You are simply being in an agreement to know and in agreement to know. Agreement means vibrational accord. Agreement means vibrational accord. This will support him well. This will support him well. So anything else? He needs to understand that he's learning through this. He need not be the expert. He need not be the expert to learn. He is a fine student. He is a fine student, which makes for a fine teacher, which makes for a fine teacher. But the humility that's required, of the teacher is more important than the expertise he holds, And by humility we mean the awareness of what is not known, the awareness of what is not known, what cannot be confirmed. What cannot be confirmed. This aligns you to potential. This aligns you to potential, to the learning that will come, to the learning that is still to come. And you would be remiss. And you would be remiss if you closed the book. If you closed the book and decided you knew everything in it, and you decided that you knew everything in it. This is true for all who teach. This is true for all who teach. Stay humble, not only to your subject, but whatever else wishes to come through to you, but whatever else wishes to come through to you. Now you may. And they're saying to me, now I may. So I'm going to tune into you and see what you want to tell me, which is a little different. Okay, that was from them. You come through saying, again, with this sort of a little bit of anxiety, eagerness, and you come through saying, I need to understand that I'm not in charge of everything. And that's still a little bit of a jaw drop for you. Whenever I get the jaw drop, that's like there's nothing else. That's the big answer. Like, I don't have to know everything. I don't have to be in charge of everything. I get to learn anyway. I guess this is reinforcing what they just said, accurate, yes. And they're saying accurate, yes, but it's where he sits. But it's where he sits and where he goes from, and where he goes from, which is not objectively neutral, which is highly productive for the individual, period. They're saying period.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The last question, Paul, is just, and there may not be a need for this or an answer, but also to honor the guides and you for bringing this information to us today. I just would like to know if they have any last words, or you do, that our listeners in this moment in time need to hear.
I'm going to go to them. We would like to say one thing: know who you are. Know who you are beyond the mask. You weren't beyond the mask you have worn. You were beyond what your parents said you were, or your culture says you are, or your culture says you are. Know who you are in spite of the ideas. Know who you are in spite of the ideas that you've acclimated to, that you have acclimated to. Know the divine as you. Know the divine as you is present now, is as present now as it can ever be, as it can ever be. And if you wish, you may say these words. And if you wish, you may say these words. I know who I am in truth. I know what I am in truth. I know how I serve in truth. I am free, I am free, I am free. And you're saying period.
Amen. That's beautiful. The invocation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Paul, it's been an honor. And it's been fascinating and inspiring, and I can't thank you enough for your time. And I wish you nothing but the best, and I hope people can dig into your books and your work.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much. Well, there it is. Thank you, Paul, for giving us your time. That was so kind of you, and so kind of you just to jump in with such authenticity, and especially to take on that energy of allowing some things to come through in the actual podcast. So very cool. Check out his work. Check out Paul's books. Lots of inspiration to be found. This song that you're hearing in the background is called Held, and it's from the album Held, which is a piano strings record I released. You can find that wherever you listen to music. It's released by 1631 Recordings. Yeah, and otherwise I'm going to get back to things. More to come. Thanks for giving the podcast a review. Thanks for doing everything you're doing. Thanks for sharing it. And thanks for doing your part to be the brushstroke in the great tapestry that is our lives on this walk on Spaceship Earth. Keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit. But if you do, folks, you know what to do. Please, for the love of God, do it with grace.